Yeah, no problem. So, Silas, just in relation to the Kabbalah and the Qliphoth, can you just give like an introductory idea as to what this concept is for the uninitiated? What does it mean, and where has it come from in your understanding of it?
From my understanding, the Qliphoth translates literally as the shells or the husks. So, in terms of the beginning, this is within Lurianic Kabbalah, so this is the far more modern iteration of Kabbalah, post-medieval Kabbalah. The Qliphoth would be described as the husks, the shells that entered what's termed as the Etz Haim, or the Tree of Life as we know it. The Sephirot's another term for that. During what is termed within Lurianic Kabbalah as the Shivrit HaKalim, or the shattering of the vessels. So at this point, and again, this is a sort of metaphysical, even occult argument or rationale for why we see the evil that we see within the world. So again, this is the Kabbalistic idea of that there is an opposing force. A lot of the commentary is within the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah itself is obviously one large commentary, but many of the rabbinical sources, even some of the secular sources, if you could call them that, on the Kabbalah, discuss the idea that the Qliphoth could be its own separate entity from the Ein Sof, or the limitless light of God, if you will. So, but there is some that obviously state that it is an adversarial part of God. We have the same understanding within Christianity, or we did at least, that idea of Satan. Satan, we are legion, because Satan, the adversarial force, wasn't just one entity. It was a collection of entities in pre-modern Christianity. And Shaitan within Islam as well. Again, it was as a collection of jinn, or demons in the European tongue, or bad spirits, those who emanate from smokeless fire. So again, smokeless fire, in the Islamic sense, is a fantastic description because it's describing a paradox, much like God. God in and of itself is a paradoxical force. Life thus emanates from God. Thus that is a paradoxical force as well. But yes, smokeless fire, the jinn, thus the Qliphoth, similarly, are very much so incomprehensible, immaterial, if you will. Again, we don't really have the language to describe it. So again, that is something similar to God. So in truth, this could be an adversarial part of God. We see such discussions of that within Revelation, that the four angels of Revelation, later on in Revelation, I forget the chapter and verse now, they discuss the four angels are given power to unleash tribulation upon the earth, essentially. Well, who gives them the power? Well, obviously, God, the force of God has to. Thus, they emanate from that. But in and of itself, this goes to the heart of cycles, the cycles of everything that we see within nature, the rise and fall of civilizations, thus life and death, and thus each turning of the wheel begets another turning of the wheel. It's the eternal cycle of life. And in essence, the Qliphoth is merely the antithesis of the turn. It's much like the Hegelian dialectic, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That is pretty much life, as we know it. Thus, as I mentioned, they utilised this. Hegel utilised it as well. These natural cycles, in the creation of his dialectical and philosophical models. This tragic dialectic applied to politics is older than Hegel himself. And in truth, yes, this is life as we know it, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It is a tragic form. It is the Holy Trinity. However, they wish to reduce everything down to a base predictability, where it becomes a unitary, unipolar, and unipartite world, where there is not the to and fro, there is merely them. They are in control, they control the variables of nature. Well, in truth, they would not be variables at that point. They would be mere inanimate, unchanging forms. There would be no natural motion, everything would follow the binary pulsations of the digital Pied Piper. Life as we know it would be entirely remade. Do they have the technology to bring that forth? Well, that is the question. I would say no, but I am not privy to the entirety of their arcane artifices, nor the tools they have at their disposal. But they are engaged in this agenda, and have unveiled this agenda to the eyes of the public, rather blatantly. Most probably because they do feel themselves in a confident position to pull this off, to become the Homo Deus, the God-men, the overmen of humanity, that which was foretold in centuries past, nay millennia, regarding the mystery schools, alchemy, the occult, the Hermetic philosophy, and obviously Kabbalah's Adam Kadmon, or Adam Elion, the original or most high man. This brings into our discussion as well cybernetics. Very briefly, that if they are the overmen of humanity, then indeed they are the cybernetic rulers. Cybernetic derives from the Greek word kybernetikos, meaning to steer or steersman. They would become, yes, the steersman of humanity.
Could we conceive of the Qliphoth as that which had to be cast aside in order for the creation of a system based on a natural law or a morality as such? So in order, when the creation happened, to pull creation out of chaos or out of nothingness, that within that realm of chaos, all things are mixed together. So by definition, to pull order or creation, as we might call it, from that chaotic realm, you have to push away that which, to use your word, is antithesis to the creation. So the husks, or the Qliphoth, as it were, are that which had to be hacked away in order for the creation to arise, in the way that a sculptor might chip away flakes of marble from the statue, taking the form out of the raw marble block. So it's the parts that had to be removed in order for the natural law, the logos, the creation to exist. Can we think of it in that way?
In a way, yes. Again, it's the sort of antithesis or counterpoint. But again, in essence, one could argue that counterpoint has to exist for the point at which we are at, the creation, for it to exist. Death has to have a counterpoint to, that being life, and thus the opposite is true for life. For any of these concepts to have relevance, it's the paradox. We don't want death, but we need death for life. It's very much, again, it's the mystery of life. It's the mystery of existence, if you will, but the mystery of the creation, rather.
Is it fair? Is it fair? Sorry to go. Is it fair for us to kind of say that when we speak about the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth, the tree of life and the tree of death aspects of the Kabbalah, that
Indeed,
this
yeah.
is a far older tradition than the Kabbalah, and we can see parallels with this mystical / kind of religious awareness of the forces in the world and the creation around us in other traditions. For example, the Hermetic, etc. Or So is it fair to say that let's not just completely hang this on the Kabbalah, that this is actually a far wider...
Oh, yeah. This goes I mean, the Kabbalah is merely. I mean, I merely only I talk about the Kabbalah only because it's been codified in the modern
Mm,
sense in Lurianic Kabbalah. But again, you're totally right. This goes way further back. I've managed to track it back as far as, I mean, the fundamentals of what we're talking about here. You know, the Qliphotic and the Tree of Life, or as above, so below. That's another thing you'll find with
mm,
illustrations and iconography, depictions of the Tree of Life and Tree of Death, that they are mirror images of one another, and that the
mm,
union between the two, between Malkuth, so the kingdom, the physical world, and Nehemoth, or the pinnacle of the Tree of Death, it creates a Vesica Pisces. That is where both life and death meet. You know, the womb, which again is a very strange and perplexing concept. You know,
mm,
philosophically speaking, obviously there is a political and spiritual aspect to this as well, of course. That is discussed by Gershom Scholem, where he states the
mm,
spirit of uncleanliness must
mhm,
be, in essence, vanquished from the world. He discussed that within his book Messianic Ideas in Judaism, where the term spirit of
mm,
uncleanliness is very much reminiscent of the redeemable Qlipots or Qliphos,
mm,
only redeemable by their own destruction.
mm,
That is the Qlipot Hatmeot. Hatmeot literally means the unclean ones. So thus, the Qlipot Hatmeot literally means the shells or husks of the unclean ones. One could say or argue that this idea, as it is described and put within a very eugenicist fashion by Gershom Scholem, one could say, or transhumanist fashion, depopulationist manner as well, it could bring the idea that the Kabbalists see us as the Qliphot, which obviously the irony is rather tangible because I would argue they are actually the Qliphot. They are the ones who seek to destroy the balance of the universe. They're the ones who seek to destroy, who seek death, who distort principles, higher principles, distort them into anti-life constructs. But again, I've managed to track this back to Sumeria in terms of the story of Marduk and Tiamat. We even see that Tiamat, or in modern Hebrew, even ancient Hebrew, the word was the same. Tehom, the deep. We see that within Genesis 1:3. It discusses God, which potentially, could be a variation of Marduk, as we see Marduk took on, many different forms throughout many different cultures. For example, he was named Baal or Baal Marduk in Assyria, Aramaic civilization. He was named Moloch, Baal Hamon within Carthage, and he took on many other names, Teshub in the Hittite civilization, for example. But this idea of the precursor deity being slayed by the new Lord of the Universe, which was a title of Marduk. This order out of chaos. Tiamat was the dragon. Marduk was the sort of savior figure of mankind. This idea literally permeates throughout history, especially in the Near East, especially in India, and especially in Europe. And it's obviously it's spread out from there because of the migration, if you will, of the Abrahamic faiths, which were a sort of condensing of these ideas. And again, as we're talking about now, because Judaism is I mean, it's advanced in terms of its literature, it's also very advanced in terms of its theological and philosophical positions because, it's been around for so long. They have a rabbinical class that essentially live and breathe the codifying of not just the mitzvahs, the laws, but also of liturgical texts Obviously, the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah being two of those. But again, this goes all the way back to Sumeria. It probably even goes further back than that. If one wishes to theorize pre-Diluvian or pre-catastrophism civilizations, yeah. So it goes much further back.
Just before our chat, I was trying to read up a little bit on the Qliphoth and what it meant, etc. And something I came across is this concept of left and right hand path. And my understanding of it is that the right hand path, so to speak, in the occult / spiritual realm, seeks to bring the individual into a unity with the Godhead or with the divine as such. And the objective being that one finds oneself at the highest possible aspects of one's kind of incarnation, so to speak. But the left-hand path seeks to go one step beyond that. So instead of becoming one with God, one seeks to become a God and destroy the creation of the God and reimagine it and recreate it in one's own, to one's own kind of criteria. So this seems to tie in somewhat with your statement around Marduk slaying the dragon as such. That Marduk, perhaps, if you follow the logic, the creator force in this sense, Marduk would have been an aspect of an earlier creation, perhaps of this dragon force, primordial force, and Marduk then seeks to slay the dragon, i.e., destroy the He takes the left-hand path essentially. He destroys the creator and the creation as was. He becomes a magician, adept, and he recreates the new universe, as it were, this current one. Do you see any resonance there in that kind of?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, even as I was saying, it permeates throughout this idea, of Marduk and Tiamat. It permeates throughout the Near East and Europe. So, for example, the Baal epic, or the Ugaritic texts, just prior to the sort of, if we take the official history, the first codifying examples of the Old Testament or the Torah, the Baal epic discusses the idea of Baal. So again, Baal, again, could be Marduk. It would seem there is some sort of, variation of Marduk. Baal rebels against El, the creator deity, or the deity, the predecessor deity, and becomes king of heaven, takes his place, takes his throne. We see it within Zeus killing Kronos. The same thing occurs within the Greco-Roman religion of Jupiter and Saturn and what have you. To a lesser degree, obviously, than Zeus and Kronos, but it's still there. Obviously, it goes into the Celtic world too, the Gaulish world, even the Vascones tribe, the Basque, in the Roman era. That was their name. They had a similar sort of religious idea. Again, that probably developed from the Greco-Roman religion and their contact with them. But yes, you're absolutely correct. It's essentially the birth of the left-hand path, where one seeks to become like God, or even, to eclipse God, to recreate the variables of the world that we see.
And is that tied in with your concept of transhumanism and this globalist power structure as we are aware of it?
Yep. What they're doing at CERN. Yep. With subatomic particles and seeking to understand the fabric of the mystery of the world. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's transhumanism's, another aspect of that.
So, sorry, when we invoke this kind of investigation around it, awareness of the Kabbalah, and are we right, to ask a straight question, in thinking that this is a parallel? This is informing the globalist stance vis-a-vis power. That it's directly conjoined into the globalist power structure. It's a part of how they think. It's indeed providing them with a blueprint for how they're operating. Or is that too far of a leap of reason to think that this is somehow tied in? do you feel are you fairly confident that this is the Qliphotic and Kabbalistic kind of thinking and spiritual tradition is informing globalism? To put the question absolutely directly in its bluntest form.
Yes, yes. So again, there's two perspectives on this. To give the first perspective, because it's more obviously evidence based, rather than just being a logical conclusion via elimination of potentials. So the first perspective on this, the evidence-based perspective, would be we have the ideas put forth by the modern Kabbalists of Gershom Scholem, for example, who in modern Kabbalah is pretty much revered as a living saint in terms of a Christian comparison. But he discusses within his work messianic ideas in Judaism. I forget the subtitle now, but he discusses the idea that we need to get rid of the spirit of uncleanliness. So again, that's the same sort of terminology that we would see within, again, the contemporary eugenics movement. That was born out of primarily quote-quote Christian Europe or Judeo-Christian Europe. But that same idea permeated into eugenics and, further on developing into transhumanism and such, through the Huxleys and the Huxleys link with the Darwins. And so you see this sort of network. But he discusses this idea that once we get rid of the spirit of uncleanliness, we do away with the nations. We assert ourselves and exterminate life as we know it. In essence, that's what he says. Then we can go beyond the physical limitations that were put on us within Galut, or, the process of Exodus, by the Torah. So they can go beyond the mitzvahs, they can go beyond the commandments of God. So what does that mean? Well, it means they want to become like God. We see the same thing within Harari's work, but obviously that's in a modern, almost cybernetic or neo-cybernetic idea. Again, transhumanism, postmodern. But yes, it's the same idea. He studied in the same university as Gershom Scholem as well. Harari obviously states outright that he's atheistical, but again, Kabbalah you don't have to be religious, should I say, to be a Kabbalist.
There's an important question, obviously, around anti-Semitism in the middle of all this. And I want to ask you, like, if one decides to go against the word of God, to go against the Torah, to destroy God, to recreate reality in one's own, to become a God, and afterwards recreate reality in one's own kind of, to one's own criteria, is it absolutely fair to say that one is no longer an adherent to the Jewish faith, that one has completely abandoned the Jewish faith, and one is actually intent on destroying the pillars that Judaism itself is built on? Is it fair to say that?
Well, this is the weird thing when I started looking into this. And obviously you get a lot, there is a great deal of, let's be fair, anti-Semitism on a lot of these sort of alt media platforms. It is just straight up, anti-Jewish rhetoric. But the idea of Kabbalah being Jewish is, in terms of Lurianic, see again, we have to sort of differentiate. So pre-medieval Kabbalah was a sort of deep and occult, and one could say a Gnostic interpretation of the Torah. That's all that the Kabbalah is, really, is an interpretation of the Torah. But the problem is, when Lurianic Kabbalah came on the scene, and when it not when it was founded, it took a long, long time for it to subvert Judaism, essentially. And there was a great schism in Judaism all the way up to about the 16th, 17th century between Orthodox Judaism and Kabbalah. Obviously, as we see now, Kabbalah won out. But Kabbalah has also infected Christianity. This Lurianic form of Kabbalah has infected Christianity. Christianity, funnily enough, you'll find more Christian Kabbalists than you will Jewish Kabbalists. Or so I have found anyway. Islam has its own form, Sufism, Again, that's went through serious modern reformations, radical reformations as well. Again, it brings it in line with, one could say, a sort of Lurianic concept of the world and of God and of life. But Lurianic Kabbalah, again, as we're discussing now, this idea of the Qliphoth and the tree of life and the tree of death, the Shevret HaKalim, the shattering of the vessels, that basically states intrinsically that God is divisible. That is in direct contrast to essentially all Jewish teaching, all Christian teaching, all Islamic teaching, all Abrahamic teaching of all sects. They state that God is indivisible. If God is divisible, then he can't be omnipotent. So essentially, they're reducing God down to an inferior state via their words and conceptually, because, as we're discussing here, they wish to supplant God. So they've reduced God into a divisible,
Mm,
weak, inferior character,
mm,
if you will, or spirit, because they wish to supplant him. That's my general interpretation of it. The second
mm,
perspective, just to digress ever so slightly, the second perspective on the sort of logical, just deduction, logical elimination of,
mhm,
what could be driving everything we see right now, politically, geopolitically, domestically, economically, what have you. The only way to,
mhm,
explain this inexplicable, zealous, fanatical pursuit of radical, risky, mass reformation of the entire global theatre as we know it can only be really explained away via a unifying religious motif or ideal or goal within this inner group, this inner sanctum, of which is then emanated outwards, in a sort of concentric circle. But that is, in essence, the only way to explain it. So that's another proof by deduction, if you will.
I kind of feel it's we're at a point now where we're no longer looking for reasons that this is the case. We're now looking for reasons that this is not the case. It's like we're becoming more sure that this is the scenario that we're looking at in a sense. Do you have that feeling?
Yes, yes. I have to admit, I totally agree with you. This is entirely far fetched. But the problem is, given everything we've seen in the past 3 years, and the sort of behaviour of, the overt political or quote quote partisan political class. Obviously, they're all unified at some level, but it's just the behaviour of them is just totally, totally beyond the pale. And the only way to explain it, as you're saying, is via this. It's that it goes back to that Latin phrase, the one that I sort of live by, "Prorsus credibilitas quia ineptum est." I believe it because it's absurd. Occam's razor no longer has any weight in this world, in this mad world.
But doesn't that tie in very much with, like you mentioned there, this division of the Godhead, or this, if I can use the term, dualistic interpretation of God, that He is made of component parts, sort of at loggerheads with each other. And if you take that viewpoint, then you can divide and you can supplant, to use your terms. And that leads us into the sort of postmodernist uh, mindset where we've deconstructed the traditional sort of moral code, the logos, that which was built on reason, on the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, etc. Is that all tying together? Do you think? And also, could you speak a little bit more about this parsing or dividing of the Godhead, as it were? How has that been achieved? What does that mean, or what does it entail?
Absolutely correct on that. Postmodernism that we're seeing right now, every way, the deconstructionism, the intersectionalism, the general societal morass that we're seeing play out right now within the West. This bringing us into a quagmire to which we're slowly being sort of sunk into this bringing down of every traditional moray of society. is designed, firstly, to dethrone God, because God is. People think of this idea of God. I merely use the word God because it's convenient. I mean, this force, this emanation doesn't really have a name. God isn't an entity. It never really was an entity. And the reason it's indivisible is because it has to be indivisible by the ontological reality of the world that we see. So again, another word for it is the monad, the one. That one creates every other number, but one itself is, in essence, indivisible. That everything emanates from one. It's a natural factorial, such as the force of God. By them reorientating the conceptualization of that via everything we see, and again, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. That's essentially what postmodernism is, and has been up to this point, and it's been, in essence, in motion since the Enlightenment. This idea that human beings can solve all problems known within the physical world and potentially even in the spiritual world. Well, it's got to the point now there is no spiritual world to them, but this idea of God is that it exists within everyone. Everyone is bound to this force because it is in essence our spirit, that which makes us aware. It is the prima materia of the universe, the first spark of consciousness, that which brought everything into order. In essence, that's what all religions see this force as. Obviously, some of them divide it down into various emanations and what have you, and they have various categories of gods, and that made way for monotheism because monotheism just makes more sense. That this essence, this spark of motion that brought everything from inertia into life as we see it had to be indivisible. So by them weakening that conceptualization of it, by these people essentially ensuring that our various nations are godless entities, they, through again death by 1,000 cuts in essence, by destroying every institution, corrupting everything that we see, tainting it. By them doing that, they have brought into question everything that we know to be true. That is what postmodernism's about. By us critiquing observable, visible reality. Again, it's legitimation by paralogy. That we can no longer rely on our senses anymore. That we have to have beliefs. We have to put aside logic and cling to a pure emotionality in a sort of hysterical sense. Only by that can we then interpret the reality that we see. It destroys our basis in reality, and it destroys our basis in truth, logic, and we detach ourselves from our spirit. That's probably what it was referring to in Revelation 13:18 when it discussed the mark of the beast. That people in the end will become animals. They'll take the mark in their right hand, with their actions, and in their forehead. The seat of the soul, the mental prism, that which the spirit interacts and interfaces with the physical world that we see. In essence, yes, we become beasts in the end. It is a beast system. It's a system where man becomes animalistic, and in his vain hubris, his enthrallment to hubris, he seeks to become like God. It's sort of a tragic story.
But I mean, I spoke a little bit about Michael Black last week. Last time we spoke, but Michael Black made the comment. Made the point in one of his videos that it's not necessarily a doom story because of balance in the universe. That the wrath of God is awakened, or the counterbalance comes at some point as an opposing force. The Kali, he mentioned Kali, his awakening of this primordial force in the universe to counter. So, like, it's very astounding to hear. Your summation of this stuff is like we're deeply embedded in a psychological warfare theater right now. It's fair to say that, I think, is it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, the idea of the psyche, that's I'm pretty sure it derives from a Greek word meaning the soul, the spirit. Even in German, if I
Mm,
recall the term correctly, Geistwissenschaft, if I'm correct there. Again, the idea of Geist is where we get our word for ghost,
mm-hmm,
meaning spirit. So
mm-hmm,
this idea of psychology, and again, the sort
mm-hmm,
of postmodern distortion of psychology. Sorry, I'm getting on a tangent here, but just I'll make this quick point. The postmodern distortion of psychology. One could say that
mm,
would be psychiatry, but there's arguments to be made in either side there. It seeks to simply ensure that our awareness, this consciousness, again, is reduced. That we see it in a reduced state. That we see ourselves as nothing but animals. In that state, we lose. We merely see the mental confines. We don't see the spirit which resides within us. The God. We don't see God. It goes back to that sort of Star Wars quote, "What is the Force?
mm,
It is that which it penetrates us, it resides within us,
mm,
and it binds everything together." That's exactly what this sort of prima materia, this first
mm.
cause force is. People may call it God or what have you, but it's consciousness in essence. And that's what they wish to detach from us.
Well, it seems to, I think we've kind of come full circle a little bit. Like, if we assume that we are in the middle of a psychological warfare theater, that the ultimate weapon would be to detach man from his spirit, and as you say, bring him to his knees and inspire destruction from within him, or her, from mankind. And the way to do that, to go back to the start of this conversation, is through this conceptual diminution of the soul or spirit or the life of a human being. And the Qliphotic thing, to my, or the descent, seems to me to be speaking a lot about how one kind of falls apart and down through the into darkness, as it were. But it also hints, that's maybe,
That's it.
you know can you comment on that, or
Yeah, it's probably you're exactly correct as I was mentioning with the tree of life and the mirror being the tree of death. The Qliphoth. That probably is what they're referring to when they discuss the bottomless pit within Revelation. Those shall be judged from the book of life. Again, this is all probably metaphorical, highly symbolic. It's Revelation is one of those chapters. You really have to understand the sort of deeper meaning behind the metaphysics, present within the Abrahamic and, in essence, as I've stated, pre-Abrahamic religions to understand Revelation. But again, the bottomless pit is probably that they descend to the bottom, to the roots of the tree of death, if you will, and they reside there. But the Qliphotic idea is very interesting because even bringing to the fore the idea of the mark of the beast. And I've been seeing more of this. My father had a weird story today. So they were taking the dog up to the vets. He said they've changed the the you call it, the button to get the pedestrian crossing, turn the traffic lights red. I forget the word now for it. It'll come back to me. But they had changed it, and it was no longer a button. You have to put your hand under it until obviously the lights turn. You can cross safely. So they were just the only two there, him and my
mm-hmm,
mother, and
mm-hmm,
obviously the dog. The individual came up,
mm-hmm,
and obviously my father just making small talk. He said, "Yeah, mate, it's weird now. They've changed this. It doesn't
mm,
seem to be changing. It says put your hand under it, so you can cross." And he said the guy looked at him, but he looked right through him. Just a neutral state, just like a zombie. And I've got plenty of stories regarding that from my work. I mean, people just acting really weirdly. I mean, like they're not there. And there's some other interesting stories regarding people crossing the road, but being totally oblivious to the traffic. And, the traffic had to grind to a screeching halt. It's very, very strange. I'm not quite sure of
Mm.
this behaviour and what it means, but it's something I've observed, and it seems to be a pattern now. So it's about 3 or 4 times I've observed this. It's again anomalous. So it brings into question, as you're saying, this diminution of the soul, that we're detaching, or they have detached us from spirit, from that which makes us aware, or gives us higher awareness, sentience, that we're merely existing now. We don't have access to life. We merely exist. It's very strange. Strange behavior. I just wish to bring that up.
If we're kind of right here, like it begs the question: how did we arrive here? Like in the West, on the world front, like how did we actually, or where was the opposition? Where was the fight back? Where was the fire of debate raging in society, against this kind of stuff? It seems to me that we like this stuff seems to have come down like a slow curtain that nobody really noticed, or like a slow mist descending. And it seems to me to be it's so seismic, and that it does beg the question: well, where was the opposition, or the opposing force in a society? And I don't see it particularly. And I wonder, have you seen it, or is it you and I and people like us in the far flung corners of the internet that are the only people who are wondering what the hell has happened? Or was there any major kickback in society from, for example, our intellectuals, our academics, the middle class, or did all that just get swept away, perhaps over the course of the 20th century, that we ended up in a society that was paralyzed and impotent, so to speak? Do you have any kind of idea where, like, where was the opposition? How did we get here?
Oh, the majority, and again, most on the sort of overt political perspective, the majority within any given decline in civilization. And again, as soon as a society sort of reaches its zenith, it will then decline. So that's sort of post-dating its plateau of conquest. The majority will never, they will always take the path of least resistance, because the problem is the road to hell just feels so damn good to the majority of people. Sin for most people feels better than doing the right thing. That's the
Mm,
problem. And again, this is the paradox, but in essence, it's a sort
mm,
of test of spirit. Will you succumb to the path of least resistance, or will you tread that rougher, harder road down a path that you will tread alone, and you will tread for, in essence, the vast majority of your life. But I really do think, as you're saying, that this idea of the Kali force, or the Shin, it's the turning of the wheel. I really, honestly, I think, and we got into this, or we touched upon it within my discussion with Dave the Inhuman, my previous discussion there, that there has been many revelations prior to this one. And in essence, revelation is a sort of metaphorical rehashing of the end of a civilization, or the end of the civilizational cycle,
mhm,
and the rebirth of the new one. As you see with Revelation 14:1, it's a minority of people who, survive, who reach that higher state, who keep intact their soul, their spirit. But on the overt political angle, the long march through the institutions, as you're saying, it's been a very gradual osmosis, cultural, social, economic, military, I mean, it's got to the point now where they've so weakened every foundational pillar of society that we're not talking now about if society will collapse. We're talking about when. I mean, it's got to that point, unfortunately.
Mm,
But again, as we're saying,
mm-hmm,
that's a thing that has to happen. That Kali force has to seed itself within the world, has to, again, through that, renew the world. Again, it's the paradox of life. But the Qliphotic forces, though it is, the tree of death, it's evil, and everything we see that it produces is evil.
mm,
From the Hermetic tradition, nothing can ever rise higher than its source. So these individuals will never succeed. They can try and try and try,
mm,
but I really think that this system that we see this, I mean, even the physical world, but the spiritual system as well, that meaning,
mm,
the awareness that's sort of inbuilt within every sentient creature. I really do think it's set up in a way that, the fractal expressions of it, us in essence, we can never take the reins of it. We can never change the variables
mm,
within it. We can never distort it or subvert it. The only thing that we can subvert is ourselves. We can never, because in essence we are all equal, we can never subvert anything that's higher than ourselves. Again, we can radically reorientate the conceptualization of God or, the spirit or what have you, but we can never really truly distort it. It will always be there. It's an absolute. It's and as we're going to see, it will reassert itself later on down the line
in what sense?
through the Kali force, through the Shin, through destruction and renewal.
Well, just to hit on your point there, and this concept that nothing can ever rise higher than its source, like through my own kind of somewhat limited understanding of this Qliphotic left-hand path kind of deal in the occult or in this dark tradition, as it were. One descends essentially, and eventually one, confronts death, etc. One overcomes death. One arises as a god. One destroys the old world, and one creates a new world in one's own criteria. So, if you, the point I want to touch on is the fact that you said nothing can rise higher than its source. But what I've just described is a mechanism by which one creates a new world, sort of independent of its source. So it ties in a sense, what you've said. It hasn't risen above, but it has created, if you will, a metaversal variant or a new world, a sort of a wheel within a wheel that's a spin-off from the old world. Like somebody who was a member of a band and leaves the band and embarks on a solo career, and they still have their connections with the band, but now they're a new artist. They have their own album out, etc. But the fans still conceive of them as being part of the whole, even though they're now independent, so to speak. So that's just, I think, does that tie in, or does that give you an understanding, or could you comment on that this idea that this metaversal recreation, reorientating, this Samael type attack, questioning traditional
Mhm.
understanding, confronting all laws, and one individually deciding what is right and wrong, good and evil. This left hand path thing will create a new world outside of and independently of the creation. So it won't rise above its source, but it will burrow in through the kind of wormhole into a new reality, as it were. Does that tie together with your understanding?
Yes, that's exactly the left-hand path that they descend
Mm,
from. Well, even Bowie discusses it within one of his sort of seminal. Well, this is before he really got famous with Ziggy Stardust. I forget the title of the song now, but I mean
mm-hmm,
it's absolutely laden with Kabbalistic references. He was deeply into Kabbalah, but he discusses this idea of one of the lines is one magical journey from Keter to Malkuth. Now, again, for most people, even people that are,
Right.
generally into Kabbalah, even me, first reading that didn't make any sense to me. Why would you go from Keter, the pinnacle of the tree of life, to Malkuth? But when you understand, as you're saying, it's a sort of descent into death.
Mm,
We see it within the Eleusinian mysteries, that they descend to Hades, symbolically speaking,
mm,
and they reascend into illumination. They kill themselves to then remake themselves, if you will. We see the same thing within Masonry. Again, it's all connected. So you go into Masonry, you go through a symbolic death, then you are, reawakened into the light. Even baptism, to a degree,
mm,
is similar to that. We see it within Hermes
mm,
Trismegistus' story. He died and reawakened or resurrected, if you will, as a god, as Thoth or Hermes in the Greek sense. Christ is a similar idea of that. But the problem is that are they going to en
mm,
masse ascend rather than these, individual prophets ascending? Or are they going to literally ascend? Or is this merely nature working its unconscious magic through them, or working through them unconsciously? Are they pushing them towards descending into their own deaths by the temptation of reaching a higher plane? Thus, the cycle of nature, again, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, to thus be complete once more within this cycle. That's the question I always had. Is, is, is our psychology actually set up in such a way that, in terms of, group psychology, not individual psychology, is our group psychology set up in such a way as to facilitate this destructive and creative paradox? Do you see what I'm saying there? That sort of ascent and then descent. It makes one wonder, because our psychology does mirror the cycles of nature. We sort of, again, live in a symbiosis with the natural environment. For what reason, we can only speculate. But again, it goes back to that cult idea of whatever is found within the macrocosm is also found within the microcosm, and that's what I would say upon that.
but it does bring up an interesting kind of concept whereby, if you embark in these destructive, dark, ambitious activities within nature, as it were, to use your term, the nature, you eventually inherit, the nature will turn against you because you're against natural law, against logos. That's kind of what you're talking about, isn't it? You're wondering, is this innate?
That's it. You inherit the opposite effect.
Right. But
Yeah.
if you create another world whereby the karma of nature no longer can sort of get at you because you've unhooked, you've created a new dimension, as it were, and you're no longer subject to the karmic laws of nature. Now you can act with impunity. Now you can make up your own moral code and not have to fear sort of the karmic kind of primordial force is going to run you down because you didn't play by the rules. Now you've making up the rules. So that's what I take. I can see what your curiosity is there, but I wonder, can you think about what you've said in that light? Does that is that possible? That there's effectively the possibility of creating another dimension somehow.
Oh yeah, theoretically. That's what they're going for. That's what they've, in terms of everything, they're always going for that. In the sort of ancient eras, they would have the king would send out explorers and what have you, sort of delegations to look for the elixirs of immortality. Again, that's how gunpowder was found. Ironically, as we were saying, what natural law is, if you pursue the immortality, the elixir of life, you inherit the opposite effect. You inherit a technology that's used for mass death. It's very ironic. Again, it's another paradox, but this idea, I see what you're saying. Theoretically, it is possible, but the problem is, as I've mentioned, The source is imbued within us all. It again permeates our very being. That merely
Hmm.
the source is actually us. That we are but a fractal of the source, and our own what we see as our own
Mm.
agency is but a mere is a mere illusion. We really have no agency beyond that which expresses its will through us. That which, in essence, is the essence of the first spark, the first cause. We can never escape that. Yes, we can tear down the world, destroy it, remake it, the physical world, but we can never change the immaterial truth that is us, in essence. We will always have the same psychology, the same everything, really, but specifically the same psychology. We can never change that. We will always still be stuck in this cyclical pattern history of creation and destruction.
But if we go back to the earlier point, like that, if we can subject, and this is we're thinking now as the enemies, so to speak, if we can subject society to every iniquity, if we can attack every value, every moral code, if we can break down men, women, the family, our concepts of nation, of selfhood, of every value possible, is it possible then somehow, as you said, you witness these people walking down the street with this vacuous look on their face, and they're completely, you know, perhaps traumatized. And if we can subject society to trauma en masse, generation after generation, and really attempt to cripple them spiritually, can we extinguish that spark, and can we remodel them to our own agenda? And is that possible? Because it seems to me that it may be possible. It may be possible to extinguish the spark, that divine spark, as you say. It may be possible to do that, and it may be possible to, both physically reimagine the biological society through the application of science, and through the continuous application of trauma to the mind, and to our, subjecting our societies to these compressive forces, that we eventually break people, if you will. We actually break them. And to go back to a word that has haunted this whole discussion, we create the husk. We we recreate them as a husk. They're now devoid of spirit. And once one is devoid of spirit, one has created the space for a new spirit to enter, or as we may call it, a demon. So we have created the subject for possession, to use the Christian kind of concept, demonic possession, if you want. So it's like, society becomes this mass possessed entity by this new form, and that's a very stark kind of an idea. But what do you think?
Well, no, that's exactly what they want. I mean, that was perfectly put, but it goes back to that idea. I mean, Cicero stated it, "Dum anima est, spes est." Where there is life, there is hope. Sort of playing the oppositional
Mm,
side for but a moment. Again, you're absolutely correct. They need to create that husk
mm,
society, but it gets
mm,
back to what we were saying at the beginning of the discussion. That if there is a counterpoint, if there is a thesis and an antithesis, if they don't rip out all life, I mean, everyone that has spirit within them, if they don't create everyone into a sort of husk-like, zombie being, essentially, if that is not the case, if there is still small buds of life that still remain, that are still left, they will never truly remake the world, and it will all again those as Cicero stated,
mm,
wherever there is life, there is hope. I mean, that will always sort of metastasize because life, in and of itself, seeks in its system seeks no competition,
mm,
so it will seek to monopolize once again,
Mm.
the paradoxical system that we see. So again, it's what you've just outlined there is exactly the system that they want. Constant trauma. They want a scientific dictatorship in which, again, they, in essence, to use this arcane terminology, they wish to create husks which they can then possess. I mean, it's getting to the point now where they wish to possess them via digital and implantable technologies. But again, this ties in, as we were mentioning, where's our proof that this all ties in, this Kabbalah and what have you? This links with cybernetics. Cybernetics wishes to create what's termed the system of autopoiesis. In essence, social automation, a society that is purely self-regulating. And I don't mean the society we have now and people would go, well, it's self-regulating already. No, what we're talking about is what you've just discussed, Seal, where people are literal husks. I mean, the trajectory projecting into the future mathematically, the predictability and the stability of the society. In this society, there is unpredictability when you project into the long term. In the system they want pure predictability. Again, autopoiesis. When they mention we want full automation, they don't mean put robots in factories. What they mean is turn everyone else into a robot, into a zombie, into, as you're saying, a husk, a shell, a Qliphotic emanation, expression of the beast system. That's exactly what they want. I don't think they'll get it, but I'm always hopeful. Again, wherever there is life, there is hope. In essence, they would need to kill off all life as we know it, all sentient life anyway, or remake it.
But like it begs this question around how successful can they be successful? But success is by degrees, and as it were, like, and so, like, if they're 60% successful or 70% or 74% successful, it's still quite a victory. Like, and if they can propel the ship through the waters with bits of it clinging off and falling off, and like, if they can get there within a certain range, they have got there, so to speak. And it's perhaps that they've started the whole enterprise knowing that, as such, that you can afford that which is outside the bell curve. You know what I mean? That they don't have to be actually 100% successful to be successful. It's like doing an exam where you just need to get a pass. And you get the certificate. So they seem to have got their certificate so far. What do you
Again,
think?
I would say it always goes back to if that counterpoint of life is, or sentience, to use another term, is there
Mm,
within society. I mean, it's getting to the point now, for example, that individual. There's a bifurcation of the species. At that point, those who are sentient, one would imagine, so because we have access to lateral thinking, critical thinking,
mm,
dialectical reasoning, that in essence we would be far more effective at destroying the other species, destroying the husks, than the husks would be at destroying us. Because again, obviously, the ruling class
mm,
would still possess sentience. They don't wish to become husks themselves, but they wish to just become the controllers of the husks. I would say there is no 70%. They have to get 100%.
mm,
That's what I would say. I mean, even if they leave a small slither of life as we know it extant within the world, then I mean it becomes problematic. It sort of defeats the purpose of social automation. That if you have that one unpredictable point within the
mm,
world, or object within the world, it throws out of whack the entire meaning of autopoiesis, the self-regulating society. But again, yeah, you're absolutely correct. They will go for something like
mm,
that, unfortunately, which will probably lead to their downfall. As we see in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, that on the outskirts of the city, there was a sort of wildling population who did not integrate into the new husk society, if you will. They didn't take the soma. They were still thinking beings. I really do think. it will it will go into a system like that, where us who are still sentient, who will not bend the knee to this new coming system, we will probably live on the fringes of it, and then projecting into the long term, we will probably be the source of the slow destruction of this said coming system.
I hope you're right.
Well, I hope so too. Well, it's a big experiment. We're about to see who's going to be right. So, yeah.
Well, one of the basic concepts that I sort of had in my head around this endeavor of power, this destruction of the West, this the sowing of the seed of destruction from within. One of the ideas around it was that communism into Russia, for example, and it resulted in, as we're told, the deaths of 60 million people, and God knows how many in China, etc. But in that endeavor, that was all done with a rifle, a bayonet, a bomb, etc. It was done through the use of violence. But when it came to the West, i.e., ourselves and our ilk, it was the thinking of the power structure was that the reimagining of the West to the will of the power structure couldn't be achieved through the use of violence, because it would be far too much an offense to our basic ideals, etc. So the ideals and our that underpin our society, first and foremost, had to be eroded and covered in rust and gradually made brittle and broken, which is where we find ourselves now. But the point I want to make is that if we do find ourselves the outcasts, living on the fringes of a society that has been huskified, where the masses, the 85% or more, have been, turned into the husks, if we keep using the term, and we are in the outskirts, that we will at that point, perhaps in the future, find ourselves at the wrong end of the barrel of a gun, or and that things may in some future vista, perhaps in the hundreds of years to come, things may turn violent, and the use of force, we may witness the use of force, or ourselves have to turn to the use of force to survive, or we may be forced into such a situation. We may have no choice. Do you see that might be foreseeable in the coming hundreds of years, in 400 or 500 years or 1,000 years? We find ourselves in some dusty caravan park, like a Mad Max situation, and we have the zombie kind of mind-controlled masses, their army representatives coming toward us, and we have to try and fend off. Do you think it could come to something like that, or is that just too far-fetched?
Oh no, definitely. I mean, as we're seeing in Sri Lanka, it's a sort of, again, it's all born out of the World Economic Forum, but that is a sort of test run for what is about to come, or what they wish to bring to the West. Well, firstly Europe, and then secondly America. So Europe would probably be the hinterland of the Western Empire, and America would be the heartland. This current configuration of that. But yes, definitely. That's, as we're seeing in Sri Lanka right now. They've crippled, destroyed the country via intentional policies of starvation, in essence. They've, by government policy, put a great deal of stress and pressure upon the agricultural industry and the logistical system as well, with other contingent factors such as what is occurring within Ukraine, and also the fuel costs and what have you. That sort of sent them over the edge, so to say. At this point now within Sri Lanka, we're seeing the new installed World Economic Forum puppet. He has called everyone who protests against him a fascist, while at the same time, no self-reflection, he's discussed the idea of using the military to re-establish, quote, law and order on the streets. And at the same time all that is going on, is instituting a digital system where if one does not have this digital pass, they will not receive, for example, their rationing of fuel or their ration of food. Because in this new Sri Lankan system, this digital system, You no longer buy food with money or credits, if you will. You're now rationed food on a priority basis, or you're rationed fuel on a priority basis. Now, in such a digital panopticon system, and if that indeed is adopted en masse, especially within the West, it's it's going to create essentially a mega city one society, a Judge Dredd type society, a Logan's Run type society, a Brave New World type society, an isolated, closed off petri dish of huskified remnants of what once were human beings. And if you're not going to bow to that, again, because it's isolated and it's an isolated system, we will live on the fringes of it, as all systems seek to do. They seek to expand their territory, even an isolated system such as that. Again, and as you're saying, yes, it will come to that. It's a continuum.
But it would seem that the more coalescence you have with the power structure and the NPC slash husk, to use somewhat anti-humanist terminology, but the more that the masses gravitate toward that centralized system, the more that we, the likes of ourselves, tend to question it and feel we're outside of it and feel we have some serious issues with it. That these two modal points are starting to drift further and further apart from one another. So we become more and more and more visible by reference to what's normative. And we also, it becomes a lot easier to demonize us. Those of us who do not share this viewpoint or this commonality of viewpoint with the power structure. So it seems that it is something that we can see on the horizon, that we will become, dare I say it, the new terrorists, the new dissidents, that we'd be extremely dangerous, and we could be absolutely labeled and pilloried, so are we going to meet these guys at some point? You know what I mean? Or are we going to have to fight our corner? You think that we are? Is that fair to say?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a sort of logical trajectory of where things are going to go. The intersection point is going to be via that sort of trajectory of the continuum of it, is going to be that there's a bifurcation. There's going to be two systems. That which seeks a sort of digital panopticon isolated system. I mean, the predictive programming for this system that they're wishing to institute is absolutely, I mean, it's just abound. Another film is a Divergent. It discusses Hunger Games as another one. But yes, because we're ideological opponents, we're diametric opposites. So is all ideological opposites as it always comes to be. It always comes to force. And I'm not advocating force. It's just it's going to come to force because these individuals are monopolists. They pursue monopoly like a religious creed, if you will. And they will not stop until they have the entire world under their dominion, of which they have the population to a manageable level. So again, whatever level that may be, I'm hearing 500 million to a billion people, and it's a purely isolated society, which is hilarious because they always talk about diversity and inclusion and being open, and their critiques of Trump and what have you are, of course, he's controlled as well, but their critiques of what he stood for was that he was trying to create an isolated society. It was the same with Brexit. You're creating an isolated Britain. We have to be a global Britain. Well, the hilarious thing is, this is the sort of projection that they do. So they project what they wish for or their iniquities upon their enemies. That it is actually them who seek an isolated, purely isolated, cut off society where, as we're seeing right now, observe social distancing. Do this, do that. You can't have contact with other people. You can only preserve yourself in terms of sustenance via the government. You can only be loyal to the government. You can no longer have a family unit. Again, that's things that they're slowly chipping away right now. And most people are so stuck in apathy. But the problem is the apathy was brought on by consumerism. And as we're seeing now within Sri Lanka, the system that they want is not consumerism, it's rationing. So how will that affect the the semi or quasi husks of this society? How will that affect them? They may, rekindle that spirit of resistance in the face of such abhorrent policy. I'm ever hopeful.
But without getting into the sort of moral debate around the use of force or as a retaliatory, maneuver against these things, is there the idea? Do you have the idea that it would be futile, given the holistic kind of monolithic nature of what we're talking about, that the use of any retaliatory force would be actually futile, given that we're dealing with an absolutely monolithic, unprecedented.
I think of it in terms of warfare. I mean, what we're doing right now, in essence, is warfare. I always see the more advanced forms of warfare, the way they've waged war against us, that being mimetic and psychological warfare. That's always the most effective. But again, as you're saying, once they huskify these people, mimetic warfare, psychological warfare will be it'll be of no use anymore. It'll be utterly irrelevant, futile. So again, that brings into question that there's, only other certain avenues that one can go down if one wishes to go down those avenues, self-preservation. Problem is, what these types of societies, these highly centralized societies, they're typically very brittle to contingent factors. Now, again, as we're talking about, they're attempting to get rid of these contingent factors through, as we're saying, huskifying people. This is via cybernetics or, autopoiesis. By what means they achieve that, we can only speculate at this point. But, it's something regarding Kabbalah, that philosophy, and it's been brought into a sort of modern conceptualization of it via some sort of arcane technology that we unfortunately are not fully cognizant of. But on that idea, they will turn into the similitude of the children of Saturn. They're going to eat each other because the way they've attempted to organize themselves to, again, sort of circumvent these issues with highly centralized societies being brittle is they've created sort of nodes or pawns of highly centralized, isolated structures. That's what it will be in the future, these sort of mega cities, if you will. The problem is, these people are all psychopathic, they're highly ambitious, they have aspirations, as we're talking about, of, literal godhood. Do you really think they want to share power with their peers? The answer is no. They will wish to, again, as they are monopolists at heart, as I said, they pursue it as a sort of religious creed. They will seek to destroy the opposition, to, eat up their resources, to annex and devour their territory. And it will probably create some sort of global conflict. But I think these societies will destroy themselves, honestly, the way that it seems in its nascent stages, as we're seeing right now, as it seems it will be in the future. It's just, it's not sustainable, which again is ironic because Agenda 2030 is all about sustainability. They're creating unsustainable societies in the long term. But again, they're sort of enthralled to hubris. I've went on a bit of a ramble there, but I hope I've answered your question.
No. I mean, I'm thinking about a centralized system and how you would go about rolling that out in society. What you would need to do to get that happening. Like, and one of the obvious things is you recruit your agents from the masses. You recruit from the lowest common denominator among the pros, as it were. So you recruit the most power hungry, lecherous, uh, you know, sycophants that you can find, the lowest caliber type people to run the show for you. So you just have to really sit back and set the whole thing up and roll the ball of paranoia and self hate and into society, and you'll watch uh, these people will come up, these characters will come up, who will be your commissars, they'll be your, your police force, your military force, your political force, to hold the whole thing together. So like it's like once the whole thing fall like dominoes. Then once you kind of set this thing in motion, it's like you just have to unravel the moral structure of society, and put hate and fear kind of moving through the camp like a mood, like a zeitgeist, as it were. And these characters will come up from within the pros to run the thing for you. They'll be your agents. So I think Russia saw that, Silas. That's the feeling I have. I think that the soul of Russia rotted and died in the 20th century. And I think the soul of Germany rotted and died as well. And like when we talk about things like this Kabbalistic notion, I think that these have this, what we're talking about here this evening on the call is very sort of abstract in a lot of senses, but it has very, very, and has had very real, um, symptoms in societies in the world in the 20th century, where lots of people have died. Let's be honest about it; they've been murdered under these kinds of systems. But so I think it's kind of important to say that. But like, what I think is kind of fascinating is that if you can envisage a new type of warfare, which I believe that we're in, and I think you will probably agree, this new psychological warfare realm, you don't need to kill anymore, because actually it's a lot more useful rather than to have your enemy dead. It's a lot better if you can get them working for you, and rot them from within, create a society which remodels them to what you want them to do. And isn't that a much more efficacious type of warfare, rather than to have to sort of send in the military shooting and killing and risking them rebelling against you? And it's a lot more of a surefire way of doing things. So I think I kind of have the sense that that's where we're at. We're right in the middle of this new battle, this new type of warfare. Perhaps it's very old as well. We might have the idea that it is new, but perhaps it has very ancient kind of birth, and that it's been rolled out. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the mystery schools and what we're discussing here, Kabbalah, whenever they discuss God, or, they're discussing the nature of God, really, because we, as I've said, this force resides within us all. The psyche, the
Yeah.
geist, the zeitgeist, if
Mm,
that spirit. Basically, in essence, what they have been discussing within these occult groups, of which have grown in and evolved into what we now term as think tanks. Well, they evolved into secret societies, then evolved into think tanks. What they really produced was a working model of how people functioned, how their spirit functioned within the physical realm. Because there's a pattern to everything. There's a pattern to
mm,
the world. If you
mm-hmm,
understand the pattern, you can manipulate the world to, the physical world to a degree. So in essence, what they have done now is they don't seek to just manipulate the person and their actions via, tempting them via the physical world, or via distorting their view of the physical world. They wish to actually control the spirit and the soul directly, as we're talking about huskifying them. By what means they're going to do this,
mm,
we can only speculate. Everything
mm,
from
mm,
psychotronic or frequency-based weaponry to some sort of spiritual taint. Who knows? But I mean, That's what they have. The problem with these centralized societies, the reason they're brittle, again, yes, the longevity of it, eventually, if you leave it long enough, it comes down to, in essence, the problems with the society, with these centralized societies are, as you mentioned, these ambitious people that become, in essence, the commissars and the ruling class and what have you. They end up killing each other because they don't want to share power. But before that comes, you will always find the society itself, the people themselves, the zeitgeist itself, the atmosphere, if you will. It changes against the party, the ruling regime, and it's almost unspoken. And then eventually there's a spark that ignites that tension, that gunpowder, and it rages into an inferno that engulfs the entire regime, takes it
Mm.
down. I mean, we see it throughout
Mm.
history. You don't really need. It's almost an unspoken energy that permeates through the people, a sort of
Mm.
electricity within the air.
Mhm.
That this is the right move to, overthrow the regime.
Yeah.
So what do they have to do? Well, they have to take away people's access to
Mm.
that, if you will, sort of, field magnetism, if you will, or field mechanics, that sort of energy. They have to get rid of their spirit. They have to nullify it. So that again, that's what we're sort of talking about here. And in essence, as well,
Mm.
just a really quick point. Essentially, they want to get rid of,
Mm.
as warfare is resource heavy, even mimetic warfare uses resources, psychological warfare as well. The media is typically their avenue for waging this psychological warfare. Now, media takes on various forms, everything from education to the news to music,
Mhm.
fashion, any sort of medium of culture. Now they seek to implant things within your mind where they'll no longer need to go through you know, this resource heavy process of creating crisis after crisis,
Mhm.
inflicting trauma upon you to then bring in a new fashion, a new culture, and then rinse and repeat. And I can imagine it gets terribly boring for them. So in this way, if you can affect people's spirit directly via, implantable devices within their mind that sort of create a sort of lens
Mhm.
by which they then by which the reality, the
Mhm.
physical world is then distorted, from that
Mm.
root, that source, then it's, far less resource intensive, of course.
Can you kind of clarify what you mean by that? The implementation of a lens as such. Are you talking about a physical device, like, or are you speaking metaphorically there?
Yes, well, we're already seeing there's an overt push towards implantable devices within the mind. Obviously, Tesla's
Mm.
Neuralink, even like Schwab discussed, they're a fusion between our biological, our digital, and our physical identities, or paraphrasing something along those lines. Harari's discussed it as well, sort of a dictator's wet dream, I think he discussed it as, that we can directly
Mm.
affect the person, from their source, their mental confines, that your thoughts are no longer hidden, that the common system will control every aspect of your biology, that it can affect biological impulses, if you will, via, some form, or some form of external stimuli. What it could be, we can only
Mm.
speculate at this point. I've done a few videos on it and what it could be based on some of the CIA documents that have been declassified to the public. But, it probably will be some sort of physical device.
Mm.
Eventually, I think it will probably become some sort of genetic alteration,
Mhm.
because, again, an implantable device is quite resource intensive, again, because you need people to implant the device. If you had a genetic alteration of the species, then you could certainly, say that that would
Hmm.
be less resource intensive.
Now, the old approach was simply to murder the opposition and play hearts and minds with everybody else. Which is what I think they did in Russia, really, in the 20th century. I have the sense that Russia was the test bed for a lot of this stuff. That's where they learned the dark art of mass manipulation and societal control. It's one of the most recent,
Absolutely.
probably on mass scale kind of control, murderous control kind of. And like, there's a lot we don't know about it really in the West. I mean, I never hear anyone talking about, oh, isn't it awful? There were 60 million people murdered in Russia under communism. People just glaze over it. What are you talking about? So it's like, I have the sense that they learned a lot from that experiment, if you will, and that they're applying like a lot of what they learned there. But I do feel that, like you said, there are these highly centralized societies tend to break down pretty easily. But like, does the example of Russia and or China sort of undermine that concept? Like, that these societies were controlled by the gun, essentially, and by violence, and they seem to have been quite successful, from what I can see, in maintaining that structure and prolonging it over the course of the 20th century, etc. So it seems to me that it is possible to do it through use of violence, and that you can maintain the societal structure in a highly centralized. So, what do you think about that? I know you've stated to the contrary there.
I would state that I don't think communism was highly effective. So, for example, the Soviet Union's I won't bring into my answer China because I wouldn't really say China is. It has a lot of. It's a sort of hybrid system. Again, it's one could actually say it's stakeholder capitalism in its nascent stages. But in terms of communism, typically civilizations and empires, I mean, this any governmental type, take your pick, typically lasts for about 250 years. If you look at communism in the Soviet Union, it only lasted for about 70 years, give or take. It it was a highly unpredictable society.
Mm,
And the reason is because the secret police and obviously the Red Army had to play whack-a-mole constantly. They had to put down insurrection after insurrection. They had to ensure the fine societal balance of all of these various interconnected and dynamic social relationships that, form society, that they were all controlled, surveilled, and ensure that they wouldn't become a problem within the future. So again, very resource intensive. The problem is with these societies, because they have to focus so much on suppressing the domestic population, they become less versatile in dealing with external issues and external
mm,
problems, external enemies. That's what, one could argue that the Soviet Union was probably
mm,
artificially collapsed. Yes, I agree. But the Soviet Union did not have long to go at that point, even with the reformations they experienced, within the late 80s and what have you. But they did learn a great deal from the Soviet Union, obviously Operation Trust, which was something that was used at the infancy of the
mm,
Soviet Union to trick and then destroy the nationalist or reactionary forces or counter revolutionary forces, if you will. That's something they've used now, again, with Trump. They used that with Trump, this sort of false savior, bring everyone out the woodwork, and get them believing in delusions, keep them distracted with, the trust in the plan, trust, Operation Trust.
mm,
The other one would be their usage of, or their weaponization of the food supply. That's something we're going to see much more of, and we're already seeing it within Sri Lanka. The World Economic Forum has discussed it or implied it within their
mm,
discussions regarding using that as a sort of nudging tool. Again, euphemism for weaponization of it. So, and yes,
mm,
they learned a lot from the Soviet Union. I would agree with you wholeheartedly in that it was the sort of petri dish or the test run
mm.
for this.
I mean, it's a very fascinating kind of a concept that the Soviet Union was artificially collapsed, and it's one I first came across. Anatoly Golitsyn, a book, New Lies for Old, where he details the artificial collapse of the Soviet Union. Collapsing the economy, as you said, perhaps it was on the way out anyway, and it took a dive, or perhaps, to put it in simple terms, they artificially collapsed it so the West would be lulled into a false sense of security. Vis-a-vis it had no external enemy, so there was nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, they launched this kind of postmodernist attack on the Western psyche, and it's a far worse enemy than we ever might have anticipated, because it's unseen. You can't hear the bullet flying out the barrel of the gun, etc. And it co-ops the lowest elements in our own society into as its useful idiots and its commissars, so to speak. But yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. I kind of lost my train of thought there a little bit. The Russian experience, this idea really that history, or vast aspects of it, as they're presented to us, are false or fake. And it's a struggle for us to try and elucidate really what's real and what is not. And I think that's part of what these types of discussions are very valuable, because it helps me and maybe other people like me to take a step back and sift through the data and calmly go, well, where are we in relation to this? What's actually happening? What can we do? What should we do? What should we not do? Who is friend and foe? What's the scope of the battlefield? Where is the enemy positioned? What's the likely trajectory of their strategies? Where's their weak point? Where are they strong, etc., etc. So I think it's valuable to take a step back and have a look at this stuff.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's again, as we were mentioning at the beginning of our discussion, we are in essence profiling them. That's absolutely what we're doing. It's like we're trying to catch a serial killer. We have to profile them. We have to sift through these details to see what makes them tick, what motivates them, what's the motive for this crime, and what is the ulterior agenda behind it. What's the end goal of this all? And obviously people could say that they're this is lunacy, which I agree it is, but there is a certain method to this madness. Sorry, Zeal.
No, not at all. Not at all. I don't think it's lunacy at all. I think it's genius. It's a dark genius, It's a hunger for power, absolute power. It's totalitarianism, and, the best luck to them. But if we get them before they cross the finish line, my hope is that they'll be sorry they tried it, and they'll learn their ways in a manner which should be fitting. Shall we say, in a manner that would be fitting. And Silas, we have lots more to talk about. I want to thank you for this evening's chat. It's been huge, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again at some point. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
No, we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, I just suppose one thing I wanted to say is, in summary, that we started the kind of the chat. We were talking about psychological warfare, and we went into the various strands of the Kabbalah. But I think an important summary point is that we note that a knowledge of how the human mind, psyche, and spirit works is of huge benefit with regard to a successful outcome of a psychological warfare campaign. Because if you know what makes people tick, essentially, you can manipulate them.
That's it.
So, in theory, a structure such as the Kabbalah, which happens to be a spiritual sort of a roadmap for how the human spirit, soul, psyche functions, if you have an intimate knowledge of that, you can use it then to manipulate, and you can weaponize it, and you can use it in this you can use it as a psychological warfare weapon. So I think it ties together. That's why we're interested. Sometimes it's important to state that it's why we're interested, or why I'm interested in it. It's how has it been manipulated? What have they learned from it? What do they know about people? It's like the man who works with the hawk. He studies the hawk. He watches how it flies, where it lands. How it attacks, how it hovers. He studies it in depth. He becomes, more and more attuned to the bird, and he effectively eventually gets inside the mind of the bird, and he becomes, at one with it in a sense, and he becomes so close to it that he can train it, and he can use it, to attack prey, and it's kind of that mindset of watching and understanding and gathering the intelligence and getting inside the mind of the masses, to manipulate them essentially. So that's how this Kabbalistic or any spiritual tradition, perhaps the Hermetic or any other um, tradition, how we feel they may be using this stuff, with a view to getting inside our head. Is that correct? Is that a fair
Absolutely.
summary?
Well, it's all born out of the adepts. I touched upon it within our previous discussion
Mm,
regarding the adepts. They saw the celestial bodies, the movement of the celestial
mm,
bodies over centuries, that sort of cyclical idea of life. They then transplanted that idea
mm,
to the microcosm where they dwelt, and from that was born this sort of ancient psychology, that which they have developed, evolved into what we see now, modern psychological warfare. But I would say as well, you're absolutely correct. Manipulating the masses, the mimetic warfare.
mm,
In essence, we
mm.
can do that as well. We
Yeah.
can just as easily infect the minds of individuals and turn them into weapons of this
Mm,
war against the rulers just as easily as they can, because they've obviously
mm,
they've dumbed down a great deal of people. And they know this. That again, this is why
mm,
they're seeking to control them by more direct means,
mm,
instead of leaving them up as a sort of no man's land by which
mm.
both sides can eternally fight over these tools, these resources within this war. It's a sad reality, but that's the way it is.
So do we find ourselves, and the people perhaps who are listening to this call, we are the rebel force. We are leading the charge, uh, the opposition. Uh,
Yes, yeah. If you've made it to this point in the discussion, then you are, in essence, a potential mimetic warrior, to invent a term. You
right.
you're up there in terms of intelligence, and not just intelligence, just basic observation skills, and having the desire and the inclination
Mm.
to learn. Hopefully, what's been mentioned here, you look into it more, and you can too apply these principles that our enemy is applying against
Well,
us.
it brings to mind the words of an old, and I don't want to sound too romantic, because some of this stuff is a lot more harsher than it might sound. But there was an old rebel leader here in Ireland, and he was speaking about the enemy. And he said about the enemy, he said they're so clever. They not only know what you're thinking, but in some cases they know it before you actually thought it. So you're really in the realm
Mhm.
of studying the enemy, and the concept of deceit, deception, is a primary factor, is to penetrate that deception and to understand what's going on, what's up, what's down. As you said, reintegrate the mind and find out what's real, what's not. So, but I have the sense there's some sort of movement there. I know you're kind of fairly prevalent on the internet these days, and perhaps you've been discussing things with people, or people have contacted you. Have you the sense that there is some sort of a shift, or there's this, dare I say it, maybe not a movement, but that there's a kind of an awareness happening? Have you that kind of sense?
Oh, definitely. If you look on social media, it's absolutely rife with people that are against this outrightly neo-feudalist, or one could say fascistic takeover by the World Economic Forum and their ilk. Obviously,
Mm,
they're simply just front organisations
mm,
for the sort of inner sanctum, or the inner sanctum of the cabal. But
mm,
yes, there is a movement there.
mm,
The problem is,
mm.
it now needs a leader with integrity, or leaders with integrity, because they will now seek to firstly character assassinate this group. We see it in Sri Lanka, the fascist protesters or what have you. They'll seek to do that, or in essence,
Yeah.
they'll seek to implant their own leaders, false messiahs within head of the movement.
Of course. But as you sort of said, within the, we were talking about Russia there a while ago, and this idea that the system can fall, that this kind of a zeitgeist can just slowly move through
So
the masses for no apparent obvious reason, and it may not be organized, it may not have sort of leaders or a flag or a statement. You know what I mean? It may not be identifiable, but it might be just some sort of, hopefully, because then it's far more difficult to pinpoint. It's
exactly,
far
yeah.
more difficult to co-opt. It's far more difficult to waylay or to put, controlled kind of elements within there, or Asian provocateurs or whatever
Well,
within the movement to plan, because it doesn't have,
exactly.
and
So
that I think is the ideal nature of it, because you can't fight what you cannot see,
exactly.
and it's everywhere and nowhere, and it has no identity yet is palpable. So I would hope that that's where this counterbalance will come in society. That's my.
Ideas are bulletproof. I would even go one step further, as you're saying, it's a psyche. It's almost a psychic shift within the population. That can't be stopped. What they're trying to do now is mitigate it until they get to their little, end goal, their agenda, where they can then quash it.
But isn't it very ironic that they may have started out this whole endeavor with a view to manipulating psyche, but some natural
That's it.
inordinate force within the psyche
That's
then
it.
rebels back against them, and it's like as if they shouldn't have messed around with that which they
That's
don't
exactly
fully
it.
understand, or understand to an extent, because ultimately I think they are chaotic forces ultimately, because they're tied into the creation, and in nature, like there's an element when you get deep inside it, that there's an impenetrability to it, and an eternal nature to it, that when you try to mess with it with the hand of man, it can backfire
Oh,
very,
absolutely.
very badly. Like, I feel,
It's a
and
sine wave.
you
The
know,
entirety of the universe,
mm,
everything we see is essentially a sine wave, and it's always hitting a limit,
mm,
an upper echelon limit, then it will revert back to the mean. It will hit a lower echelon limit, then it will
mm,
revert back to the mean. When they mess around and distort
mm,
things, I mean, you see it within the market all the time. Any market, you can look through all financial economic history. Whenever government seeks to sage a problem in one sector of the economy, by them doing that, they create another problem somewhere else in the economy. They plug one hole, and then
mm,
that creates a pressure change in the other part of
mm,
the wall, and then there's another hole in it. So they're constantly playing whack-a-mole in essence.
mm, mm,
Um, by them doing that, what we're seeing
mm,
right now, by them constantly, I
mm,
mean, at this point
mm,
now, it's 100% 24/7 constant psychological alteration, mimetic warfare upon the population. At any point, and we're already seeing it. I think
mm,
we're already seeing it, honestly.
mm,
They will create, again, that Kali force within people will come out, that Shin force.
mm,
It will destroy them, just as we say,
yeah,
a sort of a psychic shift, a change in the
mm,
zeitgeist, like a wildfire. And it doesn't even have to be spoken, it's just sort of felt. It's the spirit, you know? You can't fight it. It's impossible.
yeah. But it like this, as you kind of you highlight there, this hysterical, inventing kind of, we have COVID, and we have Ukraine, we have the climate, we have critical race theory, we have gender stuff, we have all these kind of hysterical node points that seem to be created all the time, and trauma being thrown at us by the media, and like I just have the sense that they are now having to respond in this manner because of the
Mhm.
proliferation of information through the internet, and the
Yeah.
availability of information on the internet. So this is a completely new era. I suppose, I can remember back to 2000, 2001, where I didn't have a mobile phone and the internet was something rare-ish. People were using it, but it wasn't as absolutely mundane as it is now. Whereas now, within say 20 odd years, it's in everybody's room, front room all the time, and it's become a normalized kind of a part of society. But it's brought a huge worry for the power structure as I see it, because the proliferation of information, you can get it out there quick, but people can get their own stuff very quickly too.
Mhm.
So hence, like, it's thrown the warfare, psychological warfare thing into a spin, or into
Oh yeah.
it's hastened it or accelerated it, because now they have to counter, and they have to have the traumatic news story more and more to keep the focus, the attention of the masses, as it were. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's the internet is a double-edged sword. They actually require it.
Mm,
This is the sort of another paradox. They require the internet for the new system that's coming in. They require
mm,
that
mm,
sort of digital interconnectivity. Obviously, the Internet of Bodies, the
mm,
Internet of Things as well is connected with that.
mm,
That will come later on as we're discussing.
mm.
The sort of hostification.
But it was somewhat of a Pandora's box for them. They
Yes.
had to have it, but it's like they had to very carefully manage it at the same time.
Yes, as we were talking about with the idea of mimetic warfare, once they start messing around with things, it causes issues.
Mm,
But the problem is they need to do that for them to, in essence, they don't want to die, as we've discussed. In
mm,
essence, they want to reach a certain level of godhood,
mm,
immortality, and what have you. Requisite
mm,
step to that end goal is for them to truly open Pandora's box. They need what's in Pandora's box to bring about their final
mm,
goal, their final culmination of their plan. The problem is it's
mm,
a double-edged sword. Within the transitional era that we see right now, at any point, this entire thing could go into full meltdown. And I mean,
mm.
that just doesn't affect them, it affects us as well. It would literally be a new dark age. But if they manage to
Yeah.
pull it off, it becomes a system, an unassailable system
Mm,
to us in the lower orders. It becomes a system that,
mm,
is largely insufferable. The problem is you'll be so numb by digital technology that you won't even feel the pain of the system. It's the sort of it's the strange twist of it. But I really think a
mm,
lot of people are understanding the sort of system that the Mad Hatters are wishing to create. And I really do think a lot of people are against it. And what you have to remember is we, the sort of proliferators, one could say, of this information, we are actually the far more peaceful members of society. We are merely talking, we wish to bring
mm,
into focus certain issues that affect us and will affect us. But when you start really annoying and causing total hindrance to the middle class, I can truly, truly say their apathy will soon dispel. When they understand that they will no longer be going to the shops and going on shopping sprees and engaging in, mindless,
mm,
vapid, 24/7 constant consumerism, and you will now bring in a system of rationing.
mm,
When they start to see that system on the horizon just before it reaches, before they reach obviously their huskified state, I really do think they're going to
mm,
become rather unruly, should we say. So again, that is an issue for the ruling class. And everything they're doing right now, it's a massive gamble. It's very risky. And it all has to be rigidly planned, which obviously makes it brittle to contingencies, things of happen chance. So that's our opportunity.
but I think one of the key concepts is to keep the middle class busy. So, like, simple things like the
Yeah.
cost of living, trying to get on in your job, trying to keep the kids in school, trying to get the mortgage repaid, trying to keep diesel or petrol in the car, you know, all this basic stuff that you do, trying to get to the shop and buy the groceries at the store, get enough food, all the regular, ordinary stuff that Joe Soap, middle class Mondeo man, or whatever you want to call him, that he or she has to do. Like, they are, if you pardon the expression, up to their tits trying to get through dealing with day to day life, trying to run a business, you know, trying to keep the show on the road. So they're absolutely, I think it's actually tactical myself. I have the sense that it's tactical, that the whole system is set up to keep them quiet and busy and give them that they don't have a lot of wriggle room, and that they'll just be paralyzed really by the system, and that they're sort of enslaved by it in a sense. There is no room for them to dissent, to become a dissident. Because they're caught up in it. They're too caught up in it, as I see it, and it's normalized. And by virtue of the common sense thing, where they want to fit into society, they're psychologically attuned to it, and they're very much so. So I hope that they will, that things will get bad enough for them to kick off. But even at, the feeling I have is that it'll be kept in a fine balance, and I do, you mentioned the middle class, and I do think that the power structure thinks about society in these terms. It uses these terms like, what about the middle class? What do we do with them? They're the ones who, they're the civil servants, the government representatives, they run the police, the military, whatever, civil society, they're the business owners. They are really the kind of the people that keep, that are society in lots of senses, because they have the wherewithal to change things. Whereas you could argue that the working class are struggling more, or may not have the voice as such, or may not be as well positioned because they're not interfacing directly with the structure as such. Now that might not be a very fair comment in some ways, but I think there's some reason to back it up. And whereas the middle class are far more plugged in, interfacing directly with what's going on. So I think it is a kind of key. It's an interesting kind of idea that they would revolt. I'd love to see it. I think myself, they're just far too paralyzed, and they're far too much within their white picket fence world, and they've just bought this whole thing hook, line, and sinker. But there does seem to be, for my money anyway, a gradual kind of awareness around something's not right. Something's not right. As I talked to a work colleague of mine, she said, look, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? You can't change anything. There you had that sense of paralysis. And, so it remains to be seen.
I would say, though, as well, just by bringing that awareness to them, and if we understand the objective of modern warfare being in essence, the paralysis or destabilization of the means of an enemy's production, or an enemy's means of production, rather. Merely making them aware of the type of system their ruling class wish for them. We've really done all we can do, but at that point as well, they also become less of a productive member of society. Now, again, that may not affect the bottom line of the ruling class. It is obviously an illusory system, monetarily and economically. But it causes an issue when they have to bring to the fore constant crises in terms of, states of war. So essentially, we saw it through the medical event that just occurred, the Ukraine crisis. All of this, when it comes to the cost of living crisis, that's not a tap that can just be sort of turned off very easily. Again, it causes issues within the markets as well, in terms of the consumer price index and what have you. Again, they can fudge that to a certain degree, manipulate that to a certain degree, but they can only influence it. They can't directly mold it. Unlike, say, some of these transitory crises, such as Ukraine, the medical event that just occurred, and all of these other medical events they're trying to pop up or propel forth. I think when it comes to the cost of living crisis, it's a sort of there is a tactical element to it, but it sort of goes to that idea of when individuals or the populace are spending,
Mm,
I think it's greater than 40% of their income on just food alone. Right, energy is another factor in that too. Then that is
mm,
typically when you see some sort of rebellion, either armed or
mm,
peaceful, but some sort of civil strife rebellion. In essence, yes, it may not get to that point. They may not get to the 40% mark, but they sure are squeezing people. We shall see if they act or react to this. I'm forever hopeful, but again, this is a long-term thing. And we have to understand that this isn't the end of the road of this system. That this system will linger on for quite some time, even after we defeat it. Things like this, these oligarchies just don't simply vanish overnight. It takes quite a
mm.
long time to root them out of a society, especially this is global in scope. So yes, it will take quite a degree of time to root them out.
Well, I think is it not a key concept, this notion that this power structure has existed over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years, that it has somehow, you know, managed its own to maintain its own identity within its own borders. Like it's this isn't a series of different power structures, but there's a concept that I think in this line of thinking that this power structure has existed, perhaps since the time of Egypt, and somehow up through Greece, Rome, Judea, the European American thing, and that essentially we're looking at a power structure that has existed over the course of thousands of years and has
Mm.
acted the puppet master as such. Now we can't really prove that, but we have that instinct that's the case. Is that correct? Do you think, is that fair to say?
But one possible proof, I mean, it could be circumstantial in manner, but one possible proof would be again the Marduk connection. So we have this sort of theological or religious
Mm,
unifying thread through the entirety of the European, Near Eastern, and even to some degree the Indian theatres. And it seems that indeed there was a sort of religious assimilation of at least the ruling class of these various polities and nations and empires by this, it would seem some sort of religious or theological cult that stemmed forth from Sumeria, that which became all of the mystery schools and the Kabbalah that we see. So that's potentially one faint connection within the distant past. But yes, it probably, I don't think it's the same bloodlines, but I do think it's the same sort of spirit, the same religious modality that's permeated throughout since at least the times of Sumeria and Babylon, I think.
as always, a fascinating chat. Perhaps we've been here before. We're molded in the guise of our ancestors. So perhaps thousands of years ago, you and I might have met on a battlefield somewhere with our weapons forged from bronze, about to head over the hillside to meet our enemy. So I bid you well, sir. It's good to meet you here. It's good to talk to you. It's good to know you're out there, speaking about the truth, and trying to use the power of your intellect to discern what's going on. And thank you, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you as well. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Silas. All the best.